So I think the suspense can be over, and I think we can start to present. So thank you to everyone for attending or for volunteering as being on the panel. We're really, really excited to have our first event, which is a Year Abroad Q&A session. So I hope that this will be really useful for those who are in their year before they go on their year abroad, as an informative session where at first we present our own experiences with our year abroads. Each of us have been in different countries. And after that, we will be accepting questions. We have some questions that have been sent in already, but also the majority of them have already been answered through what we've been preparing. So we will have a lot of time for questions at the end. Okay, so I'll be presenting and admitting people in and out at the same time, so please do excuse if there will be a few seconds here and there. So firstly, let's introduce ourselves. Who are we? This random combination of letters does stand for something. We are the UBASEECAS, which stands for the Undergraduate British Association for Slavonic, Eastern European and Central Asian Studies. It's a long name, but we try to be as inclusive as possible within that name. We are an undergraduate association of students who study the languages and cultures of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and everything in between. So our aim is to unite students around the UK, and we want to give them a place for discussion as well as academic support, and hopefully this event will highlight that. We aim to have an event at least once every 2 months, so in the summer you can see another event happening. It will either be a guest talk or it will be a fun, more social sort of event, or maybe both. So do keep looking on our social medias for that. Next academic year, we aim to have an online symposium, at least one, and we would also like to host an in-person conference. Hang on, I just need to admit someone. Okay. So yes, we have pretty ambitious goals, but we are sure that we're going to meet them. And with a wider community, such as all of you guys joining today, hopefully these goals can be met, and we really appreciate everyone being on board. So our panelists for today, it's a bit strange I'm introducing myself, but I am Matthew. I am also the founder and the national chair at the UBASEECAS. I'm going to be presenting Kazakhstan as well as Uzbekistan. I spent my year abroad in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, and I've also visited Uzbekistan several times, so I have quite extensive experience with both. And I've also visited Astana several times as well, so I feel comfortable talking about that. Next, we have Sophia. Would you like to introduce yourself, Sophia?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sophia. I study at the University of Manchester. I do politics and Russian. I'm not part of the UBASEECAS group, but I'm a panelist and I'm representing Latvia today.
Yes, thank you very much. From Estonia, we will have Francesca. Could you make yourself heard?
Hi everyone, I'm Francesca. I am the National Secretary. I'm the one who's been emailing you all, so hello, nice to meet you all. I study at the University of Manchester, and I spent semester 2 in Tallinn. I also visited Narva. It's a smaller town in Estonia, right next to the Russian border. And yeah, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. And we also have Kate, who will also be representing Estonia. Hello, Kate.
Hi, so I'm from University of Edinburgh, and I'm currently the social media coordinator. And I studied in Tallinn University, and I'll be also representing Estonia along with Francesca.
Excellent, thank you. We also have Camille.
Hi everyone, I'm Camille, as Matt has just introduced me. I'm a Russian and French student at the University of Cambridge, and I spent the first half of my year in Paris and the second half in Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you very much. I will not introduce myself again for Uzbekistan, but for Georgia, we have Maxon.
Hello, I'm Maxon. I also do French and Russian at Cambridge. I spent the first bit of my year abroad in 2 very ill-fated weeks in Bordeaux. Then I went to Georgia for a month, and then I spent most of it in Estonia. That's me.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we have Molly.
Hi everyone, I'm Molly and I'm studying Russian and linguistics at the University of Edinburgh. I spent most of my year abroad in Riga in Latvia, but I spent the last 2 months in Armenia and I'm going to be talking about that today.
All of these talks are really exciting. I've just heard them, so I'm really happy that you get to listen and pay attention to them. Just quickly, obviously, we're running a bit late because of the link issues, and again, we really apologise for that and thank you for your patience with it. But you can expect that this will last around an hour and 10 minutes for the speaking or for our presentations, and then we'll allow roughly 45 minutes for the question and answers. I do have a quick note, and that is that if you make an instant link with Google Meet, unless you have a subscription, it will only last an hour. So at some point, we will have to send out another link. So I'm really sorry for that. That was not the plan. The original link was supposed to cover 2 hours, but for some reason it doesn't want to. So it doesn't want to work. So yes, just so you're aware, we will have to end it roughly an hour in and then send a new link, and then we'll resume from then on. But we want to allow lots of time for questions because I'm sure lots of you will have questions, and maybe these presentations will provoke further questions. So yeah, that's the rough layout of how today should work. If you do have a question, please write it down either on your phone or on a piece of paper in front of you or in the chat, but please don't unmute yourself in order to interrupt what's happening because we're running on a bit of a tight schedule. We have a lot of countries and not a lot of time. So I really appreciate your cooperation for that too. And now I will hand the stage over to Molly. So please take it away.
Okay, so hi everyone. As I said, I'm going to be talking about Armenia, where I've spent the last 2 weeks, no, not 2 weeks, 2 months. And to give you a brief summary, it's a really amazing country and I had a lovely time. So if you want to go to the first slide, Matt. So I think Armenia probably has the most relaxed visa restrictions out of all of the countries we're going to hear from today, because all UK, US and European citizens can travel to Armenia visa-free for 180 days in the period of a year. You cannot apply for a specific Armenian visa as far as I can see, but whilst you're in Armenia, if you need to stay for longer than 180 days, then you just need to register with the OVIR and they will give you an extension, which I believe is about 60 days. So it's really, really easy to travel there. Next slide. So when I was in Armenia, every single day, wherever I went, wherever I was, everybody spoke to me in Russian, which was a really amazing experience, especially compared to Riga and Latvia. More than 90% of the population speak Russian to some level. They do have an accent most of the time, but everybody speaks Russian and they are more than willing to speak Russian. It's not a problem for them. For most people, it's not a sociological issue. They are very willing to speak Russian. For them, it's completely normal. I've never had a negative experience speaking Russian in Armenia. I've never felt bad. I've never felt like anyone was judging me for it. It's a completely normal minority language within Armenia. A lot of Russians have moved to Armenia since the war. I think a lot of people have moved to Georgia to escape conscription, but they've moved to Armenia for ideological reasons. And so there is not really a negative opinion towards Russians or Russian speaking in Armenia in general. I've had quite a unique experience because I was a woman traveling by myself. And I'm going to speak about this a bit later, but I was the only foreign student at my university when I was there. And so personally, I did not feel very comfortable traveling outside of the city or using some of the forms of public transport by myself. But overall, Armenia is very, very safe. The one thing we will need to get used to is that people stare. No matter who you are, that's just because you look different. Men stare, women stare, everyone stares. And for English people, it can be very uncomfortable, but it's completely normal. Armenians will say it's a form of respect. The other thing is, you do need to get very good at saying no. Again, as a woman by yourself, and a foreign woman especially, people may try and come up to you and try and talk to you. If anyone tries to push themselves onto you, so to speak, a very clear no is very important. And that can be quite difficult for Brits especially, but it's important. Next slide. Okay, there are no direct flights from the UK to Yerevan. And so you will need to transfer between somewhere, but it's not too difficult. Every time I flew out to Yerevan, I flew from London Stansted via Istanbul. And it's very easy. You have about 3 hours in Istanbul just to chill out, but it's not a very difficult process. I think for most countries that you're going to hear from today that aren't in the European Union, the flights are going to be the most expensive part of your travel abroad experience. And to Yerevan, depending on the time, how far in advance you book, and which airline you want to fly with, they're going to be from about £100 to £400, which is something you want to think about. But once you're in Armenia itself, everything is going to be very cheap, especially traveling around Armenia. As I said, I didn't feel very comfortable using the public transport. That's a personal preference, but they have a very good public transport system within the city. Outside of the city, so if you want to travel from Yerevan to other cities or just around the country in general, there isn't so good of a public transport network, but taxis are very, very cheap. In terms of education, I studied at the Russian-Armenian Slavonic University. It's worth noting that the university is partially funded by the Russian government. And so if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, I wouldn't suggest studying there. But in terms of the education itself, I found it very, very good. I was the only foreign student studying at the Russian-Armenian University when I was there. And it meant that I had individual classes by myself for about 4 hours a day, which was intense and very, very scary before I went. But whilst I was there, it was amazing. And my Russian has improved so much in the 2 months I was there. I would recommend going as a group, just because you don't know if there will be any other foreign students at the university. It can be quite lonely being there by yourself. It's also possible to audit classes at the university if you're there during the academic year, which is really interesting, and all of the classes will be in Russian. So it's really, really good practice. Next slide. Perfect. As I said, Armenia is a very, very cheap country. I think in most places that you'll hear from, we'll see that supermarkets themselves can be a bit more expensive. The markets, little local shops, are very, very affordable, especially compared to in the United Kingdom. And I personally think that the quality of food is better. So that's something to think about. Armenia uses drams, so 500 drams is roughly £1, and it's important to know that you cannot buy Armenian drams in the United Kingdom, but as soon as you arrive in the airport, you can just get money out from an ATM. It's very simple, it's very easy. Armenia has quite a warm climate, especially compared to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So in the summer, it's about 30 degrees, maybe a bit more, and the winter is not too cold, it's about -5 to 0. The people are really, really friendly, but as I said, it's very important to know how to say no. But I had some friends visiting me who spent their year abroad in Kazakhstan. And when they came here, they met a taxi driver on their first day. The next day, he took them to the lake up in the north of the country. On the way home, he took them to his farm. And the next day, he drove them somewhere else and took them to a different house. So yeah, Armenians are just the loveliest people, and it's really great. I've written some more information on the slide, which you guys can go back and look at after, I believe. Yes, Matt? Perfect. Next slide. And so finally, I'm just going to share with you a few of my personal highlights and the things I really liked the most about my time in Armenia. So up in the top left, unfortunately, this is not my photo. I did not get any good photos, but Lake Savan is a beautiful place. It's about an hour and a half outside of Yerevan, and it's lovely. Armenia is one of those countries where they think they did everything first. And so the Armenian church is the oldest church in the world, and they have some beautiful churches. They have a lot of beautiful old buildings, which are really lovely, and it's just so amazing to experience them and to go and find all the little nuances within the city and outside of the city. In the bottom middle, you can see the view out of my window in my apartment, which was amazing. It was so beautiful. The mountain you can see is Ararat. It's a biblical mountain. If anyone is interested, it is the mountain that Noah landed his ark on in the Bible. So very interesting and very beautiful. And finally, the highlight of Armenia for me was the food. I am a very food person, and Armenian food is amazing. All of the dishes that you'll hear about from that region, from around the Mediterranean, Armenia says they all come from Armenia. And I can say that Armenian dishes are amazingly tasty and very, very cheap compared to the UK. So if you wanted to, you could eat at a restaurant every single day. which is just questions about Armenia or you want any advice, feel free to contact me. I think all of our contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So thank you.
Yeah, that's right. The very last slide will have all the panelists' contact information on it, usually the email and Instagram, I think. So yeah, thank you very much, Molly. Armenia, it just makes me very jealous I didn't spend time in Armenia. So yes, but maybe I can make you guys jealous about the fact that you've not been to Kazakhstan yet. So I'll now take over for a few minutes and I'll be talking about Kazakhstan. I know quite a few of you are at least considering it, so likewise with Armenia, of course. So here we go. There are two ways you can legally enter Kazakhstan. There is a visa-free method, and that is for British and European passport holders and American passport holders as well. You can enter visa-free for 30 consecutive days in a 90-day period. Within a 180-day period, you can spend a total of 90 days. So that doesn't mean you can enter Kazakhstan and be there for 3 months with every day after the other, but it does mean you can enter Kazakhstan, spend 30 days, 29 to be safe, leave, come back the next day, do another 29 days, leave and come back, and you can do that within a 180-day period. You just can't exceed 90 days within that period, as I said. These are called visa runs, and Camille will talk more about those with Kyrgyzstan later, because Kyrgyzstan has a really cool system. When it comes to actually using a visa or applying for a visa, this was my method. It cost me £170, which is a little bit expensive, but that did last me for the entire academic year. It was multiple entries, so I could visit all other countries within the region and come back to Kazakhstan with no problems. So I put a list of things you'll need for the visa application. The most important thing is a letter of invitation. That is what I waited for several weeks from my host university for. But once they gave it to me, I went to the Kazakh embassy in London. You don't need an appointment, which is excellent. You just turn up on the morning of Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, not Wednesday. And yeah, so as long as you've got the filled out form, which you find online, your passport, a passport picture separately, and the letter of invitation, then you pay the money. The likelihood is it will not get rejected. And then 7 days later, you get a shiny visa in your passport. Just do note it's illegal to work under a student visa. They don't give you any allowance. You cannot work full stop. And in order to obtain a worker's visa, you have to have a bachelor's degree already. So for the vast majority of you, you can't really consider paid work or paid internships in Kazakhstan. And as soon as authorities find out, there is a high chance they'll deport you. They do tend to deport foreigners who are working illegally, so do bear that in mind. If you go to Kazakhstan, you're just best off studying and doing it the legal way. Okay, so next up, there are 2 cities in Kazakhstan which are considered the capital, but Astana is the official administrative capital. And Astana is quite a young city. It's only about 30 years old, and it's comprised mostly of speakers of Kazakh. Now, these speakers can also speak and understand Russian fluently. I would say at least 90% of Astana speak and use Russian every single day. However, in Almaty, which is a much older city, and it used to be the capital of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic, it's extremely diverse. Lots of ethnic Russians and other ethnic Slavs live in Almaty, and they speak at least Russian, if not Russian and Kazakh. Notice the order I've said that in. They tend to speak Russian more so than Kazakh. There is a revival of the Kazakh language, and it's becoming more and more apparent, but I'll talk more about that in a second. The climate varies around the country, but in Astana, you can expect extremes of -40, sometimes a little bit lower, but -40 can happen. Most of the time, it's around -20 to -30 in the winter. And you get extreme winds of 60 meters per second. I've underlined per second because it is per second. That means you drop a leaf and within 2 seconds, it's already gone 100 meters plus away. It can happen. It doesn't happen every day, but it's a possibility. This point about glasses, you'll see why I recommend it later. However, the summer in Astana is quite mild. It's not boiling hot. It's around what we get here in Edinburgh. It's rather dry, so it's not very humid. There's not really any sea or lake nearby to keep the air more humid. But there are mosquitoes, and they do not carry disease. So officially, you don't need a vaccine to enter Kazakhstan, even in the winter. And that also goes for COVID, by the way. Almaty's winters get colder as the years go by, but they're still much milder than what you find in Astana. The -22 figure that is on there is only because that was the coldest they've had in over 30 years, and that was when I was there, which is not fun, but there we go. Almaty does see a very hot summer. Once I landed in September, it was still 40 degrees Celsius, and it stayed in the 30s until mid-October, and then within a few weeks the snow came. So Almaty has very quick changing temperature, and you do need to bear that in mind. It does make it difficult to pack for, but you'll also buy a lot of clothes in Kazakhstan because, believe me, you will not find the coats that you need for Astana in the UK because we've never experienced such weather. But that's something you'll experience when you're there. When it comes to the usage of Russian, it is a state language. There are officially 3 state languages of Kazakhstan: Kazakh, Russian, and English. The constitution is written in all 3 languages. However, obviously, most people do not speak English. In fact, most people speak Russian as opposed to Kazakh in certain cities. But in every city, you'll find Kazakh speakers as well. So 97% of Kazakhstan can speak Russian. The vast majority of those speak it as a native language and often with no accent. Signs and announcements or anything really produced for the public is usually produced in both languages. And attitudes towards Russian do depend on the city that you're in. So in Almaty, it's still extremely widely used, and in Astana, it's still widely used, just not as much. So in Astana, you'll hear Russian about 40% of the time, whereas in Almaty, you will hear it around 90% of the time. And this is on buses, on the street, in restaurants. You can use Russian in pretty much any restaurant, so don't worry about that. Of recent, Kazakh is being promoted more, but that doesn't mean that Russian is being suppressed, unlike in certain countries. So you will see people speak more Kazakh, but they're still not against speaking Russian. It's extremely rare that someone feels that passionate against speaking Russian, and they can still speak it fluently most of the time. Throughout my 10 months there, I did have 2 negative experiences, but one was with someone drunk, and I didn't really want to be around them in the first place, so that was that. And then the other experience was just with a kind of corrupt official. But if you want more information about that, then you can reach out to me at the end. But in general, Russian is completely fine to use in Kazakhstan. It is their second language. For some people, it's their first language, and some Kazakhs cannot speak Kazakh. So that is the linguistic situation. I'll just quickly wrap up with finance and food. So Kazakhstan is seeing inflation, but it's still much cheaper than the UK. Rent in Almaty, where I lived, I paid £400 for a studio flat. Rent is much cheaper in Astana because nobody really wants to live there due to the climate. However, it does make it cheaper to live in. You'll often pay around £200, £300 for a studio flat, which is just unheard of in the UK. Transport to Kazakhstan, it's quite expensive. There are cheap ways of doing it through budget airlines that go through Turkey, but my friend did it and he doesn't recommend doing it. So I will recommend Air Astana. If you're going from London, then it costs around £400 one way. But that does include things like meals and luggage and everything. So that's fine. And if you're going to Astana, then the best way is with Lufthansa. I think the connection's in Frankfurt. Transport within Kazakhstan is really, really cheap, much cheaper than you'll ever experience in the UK. Your average bus or metro fare is 10 pence or 15 pence per journey. Doesn't matter how far you're going, just it's that cheap. Taxi journeys, same in Armenia as Molly said, it's around £1 to £3 for most trips. My most experienced taxi journey was around £5 or £6, and again, that was to the airport at like 5 o'clock in the morning. Trains within Kazakhstan are really cheap, but they're nothing like trains in the UK. They're really slow. A 2-hour flight in Kazakhstan equates to a 17-hour train journey, so bear that in mind. And international bus fares are really cheap. Bus is the cheapest way of traveling around Central Asia. You can go to Kyrgyzstan for £5 from Almaty, and that's around a 5-6 hour bus journey. So yeah, it's really cool. When it comes to diet, lots of meat, lots of dairy. It is difficult being a vegetarian, but not impossible. It just becomes expensive and limiting. And I've got some other things on there that you can refer to later. My highlights of being in Kazakhstan, I would say walking on the frozen river in Astana because it's quite shallow, so it does completely freeze 100% to the bottom of the riverbed. So it's safe. It's not like it's going to crack. My glass is frosted up because it's so cold. When you breathe, it creates ice on your glasses, which is why I recommend wearing contact lenses. In Almaty, however, whilst Astana is based on a desert that gets snowed on, so it's really flat, Almaty is really hilly and mountainous. So you'll get to see these beautiful mountains which go into Kyrgyzstan and China and Kazakhstan pretty much on a daily basis. It just depends on whether the clouds want to cover them up or not. And I was a part of a Kazakh English language theatre group, and I made so many friends and friends of friends through this place. We all spoke to each other in Russian outside of theatre, just in the theatre. It was for them to learn English, and I was happy to help out with that. So it's very much a give and take with our generation. You speak to them in English or give them help with English, and they'll happily give you help in Russian. So it's really good to meet friends. So that's everything I've got for Kazakhstan. As I say, we're open for questions at the end. And now we will hear about Latvia from Sophia.
Hi, so as Matt said, I'm going to be talking about Latvia. Next slide. So in terms of visa information, if you're an EU citizen, you don't need to, a visa is not required, of course. However, if you're a British citizen, unfortunately now you can't get a visa to study Russian. I'm not sure if there's any other visas. There was a whole problem with the visas even before they concretely stopped giving British citizens visas to learn Russian. So I would say it's either a destination if you have 90 days or a certain amount of hours that you have to use up for your required year abroad days, or also if you're a EU citizen, then you won't need a visa. The next slide. So 36% of Latvia speaks Russian and a quarter identifies as ethnic Russian. Obviously, there's not the level of Russian spoken is not on the same level as countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and stuff, so bear that in mind. It's mainly spoken in Riga, the capital, and a smaller town, Daugavpils. The country unfortunately has some problems, with the Russian language due to Soviet occupation, of course, and the invasion of Ukraine has also worsened the relationship with the Russian language. However, I've never had a bad experience personally speaking Russian to people. You do have to read the room, and in general, the younger generation don't tend to speak Russian or be as fluent in Russian compared to older generations. There's 35,000 Ukrainian refugees in Latvia, so you will hear a lot about their stories. A lot of them work in shops and markets, so it's really interesting to hear their stories, and quite a lot of them speak Russian as well. So if you're interested in Ukrainian and Baltic languages, Latvia can provide you both, and also it's interesting to see the solidarity between Ukraine and Latvia. Next slide. So necessary information about the schools. I went to Leiden and Dens Riga. There's classes from 9 to 12, so it does depend on the teacher and how busy the school gets. But in general, it's very relaxed, usually like 10 per class, but usually it's 5, and the level goes up to B1, B2. I personally would say it's worth it if your university is paying. If it's you yourself that are paying, I would not recommend it. And also there were problems with the host family, so if you are staying there, I personally would not recommend staying with a host family, and also not staying with the student accommodation they provide because it's very expensive. In general, accommodation there, because of the energy crisis, has gotten slightly more expensive, but I would say it's cheaper compared to rent prices in the UK. If you're someone who enjoys a lot of speaking practice, I would recommend this school because they do focus a lot on that. But if you're someone who struggles with grammar or writing, I would say unless you're an independent learner and you push yourself outside of class to improve, then it's not worth it. There's also this other school that I've just briefly done some research on, which is in Riga and Daugavpils. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to message me, because I do know some people who were in Daugavpils, I think, with this school. So yeah, next slide, please. So Latvia was one of the most prosperous and industrialized republics in the Soviet Union, and I think Riga is a great city if you're interested in Soviet history and Soviet occupation in Latvia. There's the Occupation Museum, yeah, and there's a lot of Orthodox churches as well, where you'll hear services in Russian, pamphlets all written in Russian. People are very willing to speak to you in Russian about their beliefs and everything, which is very interesting. I feel like Latvia alongside Lithuania are less tolerant towards the Russian language compared to places like Estonia. So if you have the choice between the three of those Baltic countries, I personally would recommend Estonia in terms of Russian language learning. Also because of the fact you can get a visa if you're a British citizen for Estonia. It's a very modern city, Riga, and it's very tolerant towards women and LGBTQ+ communities. So if that's something that's high on your agenda, I would recommend looking into Latvia, but also Lithuania and Estonia. The country is well connected. There's a lovely beach, and flights are relatively cheap depending on the season and how early you book in advance. And there is just some places you can fly from in the UK to Riga. Next slide, please. So these are some personal highlights that I had in Latvia. One of the best ones, I think, was when my teacher took my class. Molly was there as well, and we did a little tour of all the Orthodox churches, and she was explaining to us all the iconography and what it meant and everything, which I found very sweet. She was a lovely teacher, and she definitely helped me with my speaking a lot more, although my grammar is a bit... Snow on the beach. Juomala beach is very famous. It's very cheap to get there from Riga. It's like an hour by the train, very cheap, and it was quite cool seeing snow on the beach. I've never seen that. I volunteered at a Ukrainian refugee center a few times. Unfortunately, they closed, but now they've reopened. So if you are in Riga at any point, please message me if that's something you're interested in, and I can get you in contact with the lady that runs it. Hopefully, they'll have available times for you to volunteer. Another thing was meeting people who study Russian from other UK universities and people from across the world in general. For example, at the beach one there in the snow, there's a guy from Sheffield Uni, there's a guy from Germany who studied law but had like a passion for Russian. So it was really interesting seeing how he managed to teach himself Russian. In the photo there's Molly, me, a girl from Austria who's a translator, and another girl who's an ethnic Russian German. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, but it was really interesting hearing her stories in class about her family and how they emigrated from from Germany to Russia and then Russia back to Germany. And I would just like to mention, whichever country you choose, I'm sure you'll have an amazing experience and meet people from all over the world, which I think is the most valuable thing to take away from having a year abroad. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. You've already touched quite a bit on Estonia, and you've also touched on Lithuania, which we're not covering Lithuania in this talk. So I really appreciate all three of those countries. But if you want to know even more about Estonia, now we have two speakers for this country. So please take it away, Francesca and Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate again, and I'm representing Estonia. And Francesca and I were gonna give you a summary of Estonia. I spent a year in Tallinn University studying Russian studies and the Russian language. And Francesca?
Yeah, I only spent semester 2 there, so I didn't experience the harsh winter, which Kate will talk about. But I studied in the language school instead of the university, and that's why we have two speakers for this, to kind of get a sense for the difference between the two.
So I'm going to talk about the visa applications. So for EU citizens, you won't need a visa, but you'll have to apply for a residence permit. But for British citizens, you'll have to apply for a D visa, and with either in Tallinn or before coming to Tallinn. and you will have to book an appointment. And I strongly advise you to book an appointment because it'll take ages to wait. And bring passport, your health insurance paper, your acceptance document, and 100 euros in cash. They do not accept card payments. And you can take your photograph there. They have this really electronically photographing thing. And you do not need a work visa in order to work in Estonia. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, it's okay. You can either apply for the visa before you arrive in Estonia, which I know a lot of people did, or you can apply when you get there, which is what I did, which was so simple compared to applying for my Spanish visa. I just booked an appointment at the police station, which I've put the link for it on this slide. And you just turn up with all your documents and go through the appointment, and you get your visa within 2 weeks, I think it was. So very, very simple, very simple.
Yeah, it's very quick. Next slide, please. So on to healthcare. So if you're from the UK, your university should be responsible for your health insurance abroad. And to apply for healthcare cover, you'll have to go on the government website and apply for it yourself. And to access state-provided healthcare in Estonia. But if you're from the EU, and in addition to your health insurance, you'll have a European health insurance card that allows you to access state-provided healthcare. And onto cost. So the average rent is 400 euros to 800, and it depends where you're in and if you decide to live with a host family or uni accommodation. I have done living with a host family and outside with a flat, and the cost is fairly similar. And food is affordable in Tallinn, but I guess not as cheap as Kazakhstan, I would say. Transport is also very convenient, and if you have the Estonian ID, transport is free of charge. And city center to airport is around 15 minutes because Tallinn is a very small city. Yeah, next slide, please. So I'll be speaking about Tallinn because I stayed in Tallinn in Estonia. So Tallinn is the capital of Estonia, and it's a pretty small place, and is a small population as well, and it has other cities as well, being Pärnu, Narva, and Tartu, and it's just a ferry away to Finland. Climate is in Tallinn is in Estonia is very cold. And it can go from around -20 to -10 in the winter, and there's only around 5 to 6 hours of sunlight. But Estonia's summer, it can get really hot because there's no air conditioning, and it'll be very hot in your flat. And daylights last for more than 18 hours, and there's something called white nights where there's literally just no nighttime, and there's a lot of festivals as well during that time. So packing for Estonia could be difficult as you have to bring your snow boots, a lot of clothes, like huge jackets and stuff. Yeah. Next slide, please. So usage of Russian. So it's very different. So in Tallinn and Narva. So in Narva, which borders Russia, 90% of their population do speak Russian, but in Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, people there do prefer to speak in Estonian or English. And recently, Estonian is being implemented as compulsory in Russian schools and are encouraging a step back from the Russian language. This is obviously caused by the war and previous Soviet occupation. And throughout my whole time there are a lot of opportunities to speak Russian in school. In Tallinn University, they were very supportive. We had this Russian club where we can speak Russian with other native Russian speakers, and we can also ask for a Russian tutor, a Russian student tutor, and they will tutor you Russian, and it will also help them earn credits as well. And Francesca can say something about her experience in language school.
Yeah, it was compared to the university. In the language school, of course, we were speaking Russian. All the classes are taught in Russian. But outside of classes, I would say I rarely spoke Russian. I would say hello and thank you in taxis. In the supermarkets, they don't speak Russian. The signs are not in Russian. Everything's in Estonian. But I did hear a lot of Russian, especially with the older generation. And in certain areas of Tallinn as well, there was a lot more Russian spoken. And I feel like if I had been more proactive in my time abroad as well, I definitely could have found ways to speak Russian in my day-to-day life more than I did. I also practiced Russian with my classmates outside of class. And I know that in the language school, there were different classes. And I know the class above me, they tended to go on trips. And I know they spoke a lot of Russian together as well. So although Russian is not the main language, it's definitely possible to hear it and practice it in Estonia.
Yeah, definitely in boat taxis as well. A lot of boat taxi drivers do speak Russian, and they're very friendly, so you get to practice your Russian during your taxi drive. Yeah. Next slide, please.
Yes, so this is just my personal highlights. So I have to say the main one is seeing the Northern Lights. It's been something I've wanted to see for ages. And this is something you can do in Tallinn. So if you're into astronomy, go to Estonia. Also, in the spring, when it started to get warmer, me and my friends would regularly go down to the beach and have like mini picnics. The old town in Tallinn is beautiful. It's like stepping back into the past. I absolutely love it. I really miss it now. If you like galleries and museums, Tallinn is an amazing place to be. There's so many museums to do with history, and the galleries have some amazing pieces of art and different exhibitions every month. And also you get free entries on the first Sunday of the month. So that was good. And then the night scene as well was amazing in Tallinn. It was great. So if that's something that interests you. And outside of classes as well, I also went to dancing, which I spoke Russian to some of the Estonians that were there. So that was great as well.
So onto my personal highlights. So I do agree with Francesca, and I went with her to see the Northern Lights, but I didn't put a picture here because I didn't take good pictures, but very worth it. And it actually comes very often during the winter. And my personal highlights are I really liked ponchiki, which are like Russian styled or like Eastern European styled donuts. They're very good. And the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral was beautiful. It's one of the main things to go to when you're in Tallinn. And in September, when we first arrived, we all participated in the Tallinn Marathon. You can choose however long you want to run for, and it was such a great experience. And in September, I think it was September, we have a light festival in Tallinn, and it's to celebrate kind of like the last light you're going, like the last daylight you're going to have, because it's going to be like really dark from September onwards. So that was really cool. There's a lot of like lights exhibitions, and there's a picture of us going to Narva. It was a great experience as well, and a picture of Old Town during the winter. I should have put a picture of the Christmas market as well. The Christmas market was amazing. There were loads of people. I don't know where they all came from because Tallinn is mostly empty. And my favorite thing in Tallinn, it's ice swimming. I fell in love with ice swimming. You basically you dip in for like a second and you come running out to the sauna and you do it again. And it's really good. I truly recommend ice swimming. And you can do it in Finland as well. And a few, I think, Scandinavian countries do ice swimming as well. But yes, this is it for Estonia.
Thank you very much to both of you. What we will do, I've just been given the notification that our call is going to end in about 5 minutes. So after this very quick break, we'll cover Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and Georgia, and then we'll be taking your questions. So we'll be leaving now, and then you'll come back in a minute or two. So I'll see you guys for that. This is the second section to our Year Abroad information and Q&A session. Thank you for the whole link transfer, and I'm very sorry about that. So next we have Camille speaking about Kyrgyzstan, and I'm really looking forward to this one in particular because it's Kazakhstan's sister country. So take it away.
It is indeed Kazakhstan's sister country, and so I'm not going to repeat a lot of the stuff that the others have already covered. It's fairly similar in a lot of respects to Kazakhstan, so I think I'm going to focus a lot more on the differences. As everyone on this panel already knows, I could talk about Kyrgyzstan for hours, so if any of you are really particularly interested in this place, please do get in contact and I would be happy to send you voice note after voice note about club nights and various exciting things that you can do. But for now, let's stick to the visa information. It's not as easy as Armenia and Georgia seem to be for foreigners, but it is pretty easy. The official government advises that you will need a visa for students, and the language school, that is the London School of Languages and Cultures in Bishkek, will offer you a service where you can get one for about £80. However, out of all the British students that were there, I only know one person who did get this visa, and they ended up not renewing it because you quite simply don't need it, especially if you're planning on traveling during your time in Kyrgyzstan, which I would highly recommend, and I will get onto that later. How the visa system works is that you can spend 60 days in Kyrgyzstan and then you have to leave to renew your visa, the so-called visa run, and then return, and that will instantaneously renew your stay for another 60 days. As far as I know, the regulations haven't changed since I was there. They may do in the future. However, as it currently stands, you can keep leaving and coming back and renew your 60 days for as long as you want. And this is what I did for my entire time, which was around 5-6 months of stay. I know people who did it for 10 months and people who did it for 9 months. So regardless of how long your stay is, it's fairly easy to do so without a visa. But the official guidance is on the slide if you are interested. Next slide, please. The next thing I'll be covering is Russian levels. The situation is fairly similar to in Kazakhstan, where Kyrgyz is having a resurgence, especially in regions outside the capital, but inside Bishkek, where you will almost certainly be living, pretty much everyone speaks Russian, and you will not be able to get by with English, which may seem daunting, but will actually be fantastic for your language level because you will speak to bus drivers, taxi drivers, shopkeepers, the old lady on the street who asks you for directions in Russian. So if you're feeling embarrassed about your Russian speaking, it will very quickly go away once you're in Kyrgyzstan because you quite simply can't get by without it. As regards negative experiences, I personally haven't had any, and I don't know any of my peers who have. On the contrary, people were very, very excited to hear that foreigners, especially Brits, had come to Kyrgyzstan to learn one of their languages, and people were very welcoming, very excited to speak Russian and sometimes try and speak English with us, which was really very exciting. And I would recommend learning even just a few words of Kyrgyz whilst you're there to complement your Russian, because people will quite simply love you for it. Onto the climate. It is continental, which means very, very cold winters. I saw -24, and it was in the -20s for about 2 weeks in January when I arrived, which I was told was slightly unusually cold, but it is normally getting down to the -20s. And in summer, it gets very, very hot. When I left in late May, early June, it was around 38 degrees, which I was told was quite cool. And it wasn't even the season for bathing in the big lake Issyk, which apparently only starts when it gets up to 45 degrees. So if you're staying in the months of July and August, you should be prepared for very, very hot summers. And if you're considering renting privately, I would consider finding somewhere with an air conditioner, because a lot of places do not have them. A final point of the diet, I was vegetarian the entire time. I was vegan before I went to Central Asia, and I would say quite wholeheartedly that being vegan is near impossible. I know one girl who did it in Astana, but she only went to 7 different locations for food, which is quite limiting. But in Bishkek, being vegetarian is fairly manageable, in my opinion. If I could get the next slide, please, for talking about cost of flights and cost of living. As with other locations in Central Asia and the Caucasus, the flight's probably the most expensive thing about your trip. The cost of living is pretty low, and I do think that Bishkek is probably the lowest of cost of living out of the group. Even compared to Kazakhstan, Almaty is notably more expensive than Bishkek. For example, I paid £300 a month for rent with bills included, electricity, water, whatever. And that was considered very expensive for Bishkek. That was on the highest scale of places to live. I also did live in a host family and then rent privately, and I have friends who lived in the hostels/student accommodation. So if anyone's interested in more information about that, please do contact me, because I've seen like the renting system, the host family system, the hostel system, and so on. As regards the quality of teaching at the London school, it was very, very good, and almost entirely one-on-one lessons. Some 2-on-1 lessons, but I'm pretty sure that all the British students that were there had one-on-one teaching, which means for 4 hours a day, you are alone with a Russian-speaking teacher. So you will improve very, very quickly. It's also highly customizable. They have levels up to C1. And also, once you finish advanced classes, they offer lessons in politics, history, literature, which aren't a high level because the teachers are not qualified professors. They are just language teachers who have been given curriculum to teach you. But it is definitely more interesting than the language stuff. So we would highly recommend that if you're an advanced student who is looking not just to do Russian classes. The only issue with the school was that there's less opportunity for writing practice, but you could definitely customize your lessons to include more of that if you wanted. I've also left a point on the slide that I won't cover about more serious elevated risk assessment that I had to do. So if anyone's interested in information about vaccination, earthquake, landslide, avalanche awareness, which are things you have to be aware of even though they are fringe cases, please do contact me about that. Next slide, please. These are just some final recommendations. One is a reading recommendation if you're scared about Central Asia, from a solo female traveller from Norway, which will hopefully reassure you that there are lots of interesting things and that it's not the scariest place in the world. Points about names and naming, which I will leave for you there. Another point about really cool bars, because Bishkek gets a bad reputation, but there is an underground techno scene. There are underground gay bars. There are film clubs. There are football clubs. There are things to do. And so if you're considering going and you want to know like where the good places are at, just email me or DM me or whatever. The serious points that I wanted to mention from this final slide, before I talk about my personal highlights, was that Bishkek is the most polluted city in the world over the winter period. And this is something that you need to seriously consider if you have asthma, other health conditions that affect your lungs, or if you're just a health conscious person who doesn't want to be breathing toxic air for 2 months of the year. I read a statistic that it's about the equivalent of smoking like 120 cigarettes just to exist and breathe in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan over winter. So definitely worth considering just arriving a bit later or leaving over the Christmas break, because it does get bad, and it's one of those issues that unfortunately government policy isn't going to fix for the foreseeable few years. The final point I wanted to make was about reaching out to companies for getting work experience. I personally got some very interesting voluntary experience. I know friends who got jobs at law firms and NGOs after they finished at a language school. So I would say that it's definitely worth considering alternative options. This may affect your visa stuff, and it's, it will probably take more time to find these alternative options, but I will say that English students with Russian competency are incredibly valuable hires in Kyrgyzstan in ways that we probably would not be in the UK. So if you're interested in working or volunteering alongside study, I would really recommend looking into that, and again, would be willing to offer advice. The final slide, please, is just to show my highlights. A lot of these pictures aren't from Kyrgyzstan itself, apart from the Iskul Lake, the yurt at the service station, and the Ala Archer park with my volunteering team. And this is kind of deliberate to show you how many opportunities for travel you'll have. As Matt mentioned, it's £5 to get to Almaty from Bishkek, and from then the train onto Astana is not super expensive. It is slow, I have done it, 17 hours there, 17 hours back, but it is affordable. The same can be said for Uzbekistan. Flying is definitely more expensive, but if you get buses, and there are buses from Bishkek to Tashkent, you can do it. And so I would just say that Bishkek was one of the less popular options this year. I think there are around 5 to 8 of us at any one time from the UK. But I would say that it shouldn't be, and definitely don't be scared of it. It is a wonderful place. Bishkek especially is incredibly safe, and you will have so many opportunities for travel, meeting new people, work experience, and also speaking Russian every single day.
Really concisely put. Camille's got so much information about Kyrgyzstan. I was in awe when I first heard everything she had to say. So it was great. So I will now be talking about Uzbekistan. We're doing all the stans right now. So yes, just as a quick clarifier, I did spend time in Uzbekistan as a tourist, not as a Russian student, but at this point it was at the end of my year abroad really, so I was much more fluent. So I was already just trying to practice rather than learn Russian at this point. So here we go. Visa-free method. This is sort of the only method, but I'll expand on this. So British and European citizens can enter Uzbekistan visa-free for 30 days within a 90-day period. So I did enter twice within a 90-day period, and I think I was there for 21 days in total, so it worked out fine. American citizens cannot enter Uzbekistan visa-free. You do need an e-visa for that, if any of you are American passport holders. Unless you are staying at a hotel or a serviced apartment, you yourself need to register with the Uzbek government every 3 days. And apparently there's an online portal, but the best way to do it, like Estonia, is to just go there in person and register. So yeah, as you can see, this isn't a very sustainable year abroad option, but it's definitely a great place to visit. If you're staying at a hotel, as I said, they'll do that all for you, so you don't need to worry about it. The Uzbek embassy in London does not offer any information on their website about the issuing of visas. So I'm not sure if they exist. I'm sure they do. They're just very hidden about them. So I can't offer any information about that. But as I say, you can go there for tourism purposes, and you must say that you're there for tourism at the border. It's the easiest answer, and they're not going to ask you any further questions unless you have some worrying things in your passport. But you've got other things to worry about if that's what there is. So, political, ideological, and linguistic situation. It's quite interesting in Uzbekistan, and in short, it's nowhere near as Russian-friendly as Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, but you can still use Russian. So let me expand on that. But before I do, we just need to understand that Uzbekistan is a very conservative country. It's probably the most conservative country out of all of the ones we're speaking about. Acts of homosexuality between men is punishable by 3 years in prison. So if that is something which worries you, I do suggest not going. I do suggest avoiding the country if this is something that would make you worried. They also have come out of a dictatorship which censored religious, ideological, and political expression. So that is still kind of lingering around in the air. People aren't very willing to talk about their views because they're quite scared you might be a spy or something. I don't know. However, for the most part, the religious aspect is definitely coming back to Uzbekistan because society is largely Muslim. Most women will cover their hair. It's not mandatory, it's not in the law, but most women choose to. And the majority of men do not wear shorts. I was there when it was 40 degrees and men were still wearing very long trousers or jeans. So you can wear shorts, it's not illegal, but it's just custom not to. So certain websites which we have freedom of access to in the UK are banned in Uzbekistan, and VPNs tend to not work. Uzbeks are very defensive of their language and culture. However, in Tashkent, you can speak Russian with most people. Most people can speak it. However, some choose not to. And outside of Tashkent, it does become much harder. I've been to 5 cities in Uzbekistan, and in each one, you always hear Uzbek. You tend to not hear Russian, but you can use it. So it's just, you have to be quite careful with it. And whilst in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, ethnically Slavic citizens there tend to speak mainly in Russian with each other and with other Kazakhs and Kyrgyz. In Uzbekistan, ethnically Russian, ethnically Slavic people speak Uzbek. They actually can speak it fluently most of the time. So there may be the expectation on you to make the effort because other people have made the effort to try and speak Uzbek. But Uzbeks are very hospitable and peaceful people. You just need to make sure that you respect their country, their culture, and their language. It doesn't mean you need to be fluent in Uzbek, but maybe just learning things like hello, thank you, counting from 1 to 10, it will pay dividends. The usage of Russian in Tashkent does vary. Restaurants and hotels, you're fine speaking in Russian. It's the preferred tourism language still. But in markets, again, you can use it, but some vendors can't speak Russian. I had this interaction where a vendor was Uzbek, her child was Uzbek, and I was talking to the child in Russian, and the vendor couldn't understand the Russian, so she would translate to her mum. This is quite common with all generations. You know, you can flip that situation round. So it just shows you that the linguistic situation is very complex in Uzbekistan. You can't survive with one language, especially if you're there for more than a few weeks. Some other useful information: winters in Uzbekistan are much milder than in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan because most of the country is desert, which stays quite hot. However, this year they had a very cold winter across Central Asia, but it got down to -10 in Uzbekistan, and they don't have the infrastructure for that. So unfortunately, some people did die from this. But hopefully you will be staying somewhere that is heated and warm if it does get this cold. However, on the flip, summers are extremely hot, and I can tell you that as someone who was there in May, it was 40 degrees Celsius in Tashkent, and in some parts of Uzbekistan, it can get to 67 degrees Celsius, especially in the desert region. So be very careful if you are traveling around Uzbekistan in this time, and especially in this part of the country, because service stations are not every half an hour like in the UK. You maybe have to wait about 3 or 4 hours before you'll see one. So, you know, be prepared. Whilst the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz have little to no accents when speaking Russian, the Uzbeks do have accents. They're a bit stronger. So you will need to practice your listening skills before going to Uzbekistan. It's much harder to understand if you're at a beginner intermediate or intermediate level. And also, some Uzbek speakers make mistakes when speaking Russian as well. So it's quite hard for you to be able to have models of, you know, ideal Russian speakers in Uzbekistan for that reason. However, there are native speakers, just they're much rarer than you'll find in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. I did notice around the really small cities of Uzbekistan, they do have private language schools that teach Russian to Uzbeks. I've never heard of a foreigner going to these schools, but the option is there, and I don't think they can give you visa support, but if you're there anyway, why not give it a go? I think you'd have a very cool year abroad story with that. My personal highlights of Uzbekistan are exploring the architecture. You'll find in any city really, really interesting architecture. Uzbekistan was under Persian rule for a very long time. They've got a very, very, very rich history. So that is reflected instantly in their architecture. There's me looking like a Western tourist. Then you can see the Tashkent metro system. It is gorgeous. It is really clean, and it's like Almaty. It's something like 8 or 9 pence per ride, and it's really efficient. It's the best way of getting around the city. Every station is different, and this one is themed for astronauts in particular. And I got to see Turkmenistan. That doesn't mean I entered Turkmenistan, but I got to see it on a Ferris wheel. For those that aren't aware, Turkmenistan is in a dictatorship which is likened to North Korea. This country is absolutely off the list for your year abroad, don't even consider it. But you can see it from a certain point of Uzbekistan, especially on the Ferris wheel. So I'd like to say that that's a pretty cool highlight. So yeah, thank you for your attention on Uzbekistan. Our final country that you're going to hear about is Georgia, and our speaker will be Maxon. So Maxon, when you are ready, feel free to take the mic away from me.
Hello. Thank you for waiting. Last, but certainly not least. Actually, maybe it is. No, it's not, because it's bigger than Estonia, so it's definitely not least. Is Georgia, or as the Georgians call it, Sakartvelo. Yes, it's in the Caucasus region. It's just south of Russia. It's kind of between Russia and Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's in that neck of the woods, and it's a very, very nice country with a very, very pretty alphabet. So, how do you get to Georgia? Good news is it's very, very easy. Well, certainly in terms of the legal aspect. Visa-free method, which is probably what everyone uses. Like, I tried to look into it, but it's kind of easier to make a list of countries that don't have visa-free access to Georgia than it is to make a list of countries that do, because basically everyone can go to Georgia for a year without a visa, and like especially UK, US, and EU citizens, which I'm assuming is probably the kind of people who we're going to have here today. Or if not, you're probably also okay. So yeah, you can go to Georgia without a visa for 1 year. You're able to work as long as if you earn over a certain amount, then you have to start paying taxes. But so I worked like online from the UK there, and nothing ever happened to me. That's because I mean, maybe it was slightly irregular, but I'm still here and no one's come to hunt for me yet. But yes, your passport needs to be valid for the duration of your stay, but that's fairly usual. And in fact, it's still less strict than the EU, where I think you need to have a few months on your passport after you get back. Visa application, if for whatever reason you do need a visa, say if you're planning on staying for longer than a year, you can get it from your local Georgian embassy, or you can get an e-visa online, which is quite nice. But yeah, I would say I did consider kind of going into it and building a how to get a visa from Georgia, instruction manual, but I thought actually it's such a niche thing that probably it's safer if you know what kind of visa you need. Look at the Georgian the website of your local Georgian embassy, email them, or check the e-visa website. It's probably the best bet for you. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to Georgia to learn Russian, so it's probably good to know what's the Russian language like in Georgia. Well, the first thing is that Georgian, you'll be surprised to hear, is the primary language of Georgia. Georgian is a Kartvelian language. It's completely unrelated to Russian, although there's a few loan words. So it's going to sound very alien to you at first, but it's a very beautiful language with a very beautiful script. The good news is that most young people speak fairly good English as well. Like there was never a time where I couldn't communicate with someone, because I could either communicate with them in English or in Russian, because Russian is spoken by older generations. So people who were raised in the Soviet Union, which Georgia was in, so people over the age of 45, will speak Russian, because that also used to be a state language. And because of Georgia's very relaxed visa regime, there's lots of recent arrivals from Russia, especially after the mobilization happened last September. So there's lots of young Russians now living in Tbilisi, especially. So there is a Russian-speaking community, both in terms of old people who've lived here for a while, and also kind of a new, it's all very edgy counterculture people who've kind of been forced to leave Russia, and it's very exciting. But unlike, say, Estonia or Latvia, there is no established Russophone population. There was never mass migration from Russia into Georgia during the Soviet period. So you're not going to find an area like Estonia and Tallinn where there's a big neighborhood that's just Russian speaking. So you're going to have to work a bit harder to kind of find the Russian community, but it is there. So on the streets, you'll probably use a mix of English and whatever Georgian you learn. So like I really recommend learning how to say hello, thank you, please, 1, 2, you know, things like that in Georgian, which is it's very doable. Georgian is a very difficult language, but luckily the basics are not too tricky. And then if you need, like, do you understand English? Beautiful phrase, because most of the time they'll say yes. If not, hit them with a do you understand Russian in Georgian, and then they'll probably, if they don't speak English, they'll speak Russian, and if they don't speak Russian, they'll speak English. So you'll be fine. And Tbilisi has several specific Russian-speaking bars. There's lots of cafes, clubs, restaurants where you can go to practice because it's a Russian-speaking establishment, often kind of recently founded by Russian speakers. But I will say, otherwise, you will find that many people are definitely hostile to the language, and I'll explain why later. But on the whole, I would say Georgia is a great place for Russian, but you just need to be careful that you don't assume everyone is happy to speak Russian and wants to speak Russian with you, and that you just make sure you look for the right opportunities to use the language. Next slide, please. So, what's good to know? A lot of things good to know. First is the climate. Georgia, I think, as far as all the countries learned about now, is possibly the easiest to pack for in terms of climate. You're not having to deal with any scorching hot. Well, it's quite hot in the summer, but it's not like you're not going to hit any 60s in the summer, and it's also not going to hit like -20 in the winter. It's more temperate because it's quite far south, but it's also quite high up because it's in the Caucasus Mountains. So the average temperature in January is 2.3 degrees, which is cold, but it's not that cold. And then your July average is 25 degrees basically, which is pretty warm. So think Italy, I guess. Think like some Italian mountains. So pack for a chilly winter and also a very hot summer. I know in September, when my friends were there, September, October, it was still hitting 30s. So be aware of that. And if you hate heat like me, plan accordingly. There's normally air conditioning though. What's the local currency? It's the lari, which you can't buy in Britain. You have to get it there. The good news is that certainly in Tbilisi, everyone takes card. Like they're very good in that, and in fact, internet connection is very good. It's like the digital payment and mobile infrastructure is very, very good in Georgia, or at least in Tbilisi. So you don't have to worry about currency that much. The advantage of the currency is that 1 lari is worth about 33p, which means that your pound is very strong, and that sort of food, transport, like a trip on the Tbilisi metro costs 1 lari, so that's 30p for a ride on the tube. You could get that for about, that's almost 10 trips on the tube in London for the same cost. Yeah. And yes, food is very cheap. Even eating out is cheap. I know people who basically didn't cook the whole time they were there. They just ate in restaurants the whole time, which I didn't do. I mean, it's not that cheap. So they clearly spent a lot of money. But if you really wanted to do that, you could. The only thing that I think is notable is that rents in Tbilisi are higher than they used to be because there's so much demand from recent arrivals from Russia, which actually, now that I say that, makes me sound quite xenophobic. But that is unfortunately what has happened because they're so much wealthier than people who live there. Middle-class Russians, professionals, people who want to work in IT, for example, who can't work in IT from inside Russia anymore. And of course, the cost of a ticket. So depending on what time you want to fly, how early in advance you're booking your ticket, it's going to cost you somewhere between 200 and 400 pounds for a ticket there. Airlines, you can get Lufthansa or Turkish Airlines, which are not like, there's no £10 Ryanair ticket to Tbilisi, unfortunately. And you also can't go directly. You'll have to go either through Munich or through Istanbul. So I think travel is the most expensive thing about getting to Georgia. But once you're there, you'll make your money back just from everything being cheap. Which is lovely. Okay, next, please. So useful information, which I guess means the same thing as good to know. So unfortunately, it is quite difficult to be openly queer in Georgia. In 2021, Tbilisi Pride was attacked by violent homophobic groups. It was a big thing. I think one person died, and the Georgian Orthodox Church continues to be very vocal in its opposition to gay rights. There was a poll, I think it's like 87% of Georgian adults believe that it's morally wrong to be gay. However, there are legal protections in place for queer people, and there is a thriving community in Tbilisi, but you just have to look for it. Like right now, I'm wearing my Baltic Pride t-shirt, which I got in Tallinn. So if you're Estonia, great to be gay, perfectly fine. Georgia, you can do it. Like my friend had a girlfriend over to visit, and it was fine, but they just had to make sure they weren't holding hands on the street. just because that is taking a risk. And also, being a woman in general, you will get a lot of men coming up to you asking to marry you. From what I understand, obviously I'm not a woman, so I don't know firsthand. From what I understand, there wasn't anything more than that, and actually it was quite safe on kind of the extreme level, but there was a lot of day-to-day harassment, which is kind of just as bad. Political situation is mostly stable, although every now and then things can get kind of violent with protests. So on Rustaveli Avenue, which is the big central street of Tbilisi, outside the parliament, there were lots of protests. The police got involved, like tear gas, things like that, in opposition to this very authoritarian law the government tried to introduce, which is like the foreign agents law in Russia. So if anyone doesn't know that, basically anyone who takes money from a charity or NGO outside of Georgia gets registered as a foreign agent. And in Russia, that's been used to really persecute people. In fact, my teacher in Georgia was a foreign agent in Russia who had to flee because she just couldn't make a living in Russia anymore. The good news, that law has been dropped. They're not pushing it through anymore because the protests work. So there is a chance that we'll get violent protests. If there are, just don't go on Rustaveli Avenue and you'll be fine. Political situation, Georgia as a country is very pro-West, it's pro-EU. I saw more EU flags in Georgia than I did in Estonia, which is actually in the EU. But they're very reliant on Russia for trade. So it's very funny, you walk into a Western Carrefour, all the products are from Russia. So they kind of have to balance this political opposition to the war in Ukraine. We love the EU with kind of an economic, all their stuff comes from Russia. And of course, the elephant in the room is that 20% of Georgia is occupied by Russia at the moment. I mean, officially it's not, they're independent, but the republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia are both effectively like Russian puppet states. It's a bit like Donetsk and Luhansk in Ukraine. So it's illegal to go there. Don't cross those borders. You will get in lots of trouble. And obviously many Georgians are very angry about this. The other thing is the Russians move the border posts every couple of weeks, just a little bit further out. So just be aware of that. So yes, if you get a receipt in a restaurant, say, and at the bottom of your receipt, it'll say 20% of Georgia is under Russian occupation. So this thing people feel very strongly about. And I saw in a couple of cafes, on the door, there was a sign saying, until we get our territory back, we cannot and will not speak Russian in this restaurant. So if you see a sign like that, probably believe them. But again, most people, it's fine. You'll be okay. But just when someone is very actively anti-Russian, probably don't try to speak to them in Russian. No one's going to try and trap you. So just be on your guard. Okay, next slide, please. But it's not all doom and gloom, because Georgia is an absolutely amazing country, and I wish I could have spent more time there and not just kind of gone there as a last-minute thing. It's very beautiful. It's in the Caucasus Mountains. Never in my life did I think I'd actually go there, and I did. So it's lovely. You get to see these lovely views. There are skiing resorts in the winter, which you can go to. There's beautiful Georgian Orthodox churches, monasteries. There's a picture of Rustaveli Street Avenue itself, lots of museums. You can go and see there's huge Khrushchevkas. There's this thing called the Sky Bridge, which is a strange bridge that just goes through people's houses, but you can't actually get into them, and it gives you a fantastic view of Tbilisi itself. There's the Georgian Chronicle, which is like Stonehenge but better. And of course, the food is fantastic. You probably heard Russians go on about how amazing Georgian food is. I never understood why. I thought, well, it's just bread and cheese. It's not just bread and cheese, it's cheese bread. And let me tell you, fundamentally, there is a difference there. Khachapuri, which is in the bottom left, is God's own creation. Forget ambrosia and nectar, that's what they ate on Olympus. It's so nice. And there's also khinkali, which are like little dumplings. They're also very nice. So the food's fantastic. And in terms of the actual school, the school I went to was Form, which is, I don't want to look too deeply into how they're organized because the man who runs it is slightly strange, but you and the uni pay, you get a course. Let's not ask any further questions. The teacher for my class, which was about 5 to 6 people, mostly other Cambridge students, which was, well, has its benefits and its costs because there's only so much time we can spend around Cambridge students. But they're also lovely people. We had a fantastic teacher from Russia. She used to teach in St. Petersburg. Really, genuinely incredible, amazing woman. This foreign agent, knew people from Pussy Riot. was a fantastic teacher and one of the most like inspirational and incredible people I've ever met. And she was just sitting there teaching us about verbs of motion, which was quite surreal. But yes, so the course is fantastic. Go to form. They also call themselves We Must Believe in Spring. It's the same people. But yes, Georgia is great. Just be careful. But if you have your wits about you, certainly Tbilisi is safer than London, I would say, like just in general. In fact, especially I think all these places are safer than London. So as long as you have your wits about you, don't be stupid, as I'm sure you won't, and you'll have an absolutely lovely time in Georgia. I think that's everything. So thank you.
Perfect. Perfectly on time. Thank you very much, Maxon. Yes, so here are our social medias and our emails, etc. For those that don't have them on there, that's either because they chose not to or they didn't have time to fill it in. But if you ask nicely, you might be able to get their contacts if you have any extra questions. But now this is the point where we have our questions and answers. So don't drop out if you do have questions. And we will dedicate the rest of this time to answering any questions you have. There are some questions that you've all sent in prior. However, we feel like we've answered most of them. There are 4 which we definitely haven't answered. And the first one I will answer myself. Is it worth getting a SIM card once you're there? And I would say if you're there for more than a month, it is, because British roaming charges, especially outside the EU, are atrociously expensive. I paid like £6 in Kazakhstan per month for essentially unlimited data, unlimited calls and unlimited texts. So it's worth not using your British card, SIM card, when you're in another country for more than a month. I will probably pass this question on to Camille, even though it's very similar in Kazakhstan. How do you go about getting clothes for the winter, and how expensive are they if you bought any clothes in Kyrgyzstan for the winter, that is?
I bought a winter coat and I bought a pair of shoes. What I did do was, weirdly, I managed to buy a pair of ski trousers from Lidl in the UK, which were very reasonable. I mean, they weren't high quality, so literally from Lidl, but like, let it be known that sometimes Lidl does random ski stuff. So keep an eye out for that in winter, because I bought some of them before I left, and that cost me like 30 quid, which is not objectively cheap, but for a pair of ski trousers, pretty good. There's a lot of second-hand shops that are described as second-hand, but it's actually stock that they've been sent from Japan. I don't know if there's the same thing in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, we have the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's like in Japanese clothes that just get sent, and it's described as second-hand, and I'm not sure why. But I got a large coat there for the equivalent of about £20, which is pretty expensive in Kyrgyz money. But it was a like shin-length large coat. So I would recommend doing that, and I would also recommend just layering. The thing is with Central Asian winter is you're not going to be spending a lot of time outside. So you really only need to make sure that you can be warm enough. So like hat, scarf, gloves, layers, coat, probably a good pair of walking boots for like the short amount of time that you'll be going between buildings.
To add on to that, in a lot of post-Soviet countries, there's something called a wardrobe, gardrobe, and in there, that's where you put your outside coat. You often change the shoes in there, and they just keep it in there for the rest of the day. That's universities, schools, theatres. So you don't have to lug your 10-kilogram coat everywhere with you. You can leave it in places where they're trusted. So I thought I'd add that on at the end. Yeah, thanks for that. That was a very comprehensive answer. In general, clothes in Kazakhstan and the UK tend to be the same, if not in terms of price, if not sometimes more expensive, because they just have so much imported. And especially with Russian sanctions, now it's even harder for them to import. So some things, ironically, will be cheaper in places like, Primark and TK Maxx in the UK. But in Kazakhstan, you can still expect those sorts of prices. Obviously, if you buy secondhand, it becomes cheaper. But yeah. So the next thing is about how to find affordable accommodation in Tallinn. Kate, do you have anything to say about that? Because you stayed in Tallinn the whole time.
So for flats, in a city center, is usually, so So for me, we got a 2-person flat, and it was about 400 euros per person. But during the winter, because of the heating, it goes up to about 500 euros per person. And depends where you live. If you live in an area a bit outside of the city center, for example, there's a place called Lasnamäe, and you can get a pretty cheap price for it, like a studio flat or anything. And I also stayed with the host family once for the first semester. And we lived a bit further out, 30 minutes from the city center. It was a bit far, and it wasn't, for me, I didn't have a great experience with my host family. But I know other people who had really good Russian-speaking host family, and we didn't know, but we realized they were charging us a lot more. And for the other, so on average, a host family in Tallinn would be around 300 euros, so 250 to 300 euros. So it's a bit cheaper than what you would pay on your own. So yeah. And for uni accommodation, I'm not too sure about it, but I have friends who live there. And it's really great if you want to meet a lot of friends, because almost all of them are from Erasmus. So there are a lot of Erasmus events in Tallinn.
Excellent, thank you very much. Actually, to piggyback on that, I stayed in a student accommodation in Almaty for about 2-3 months. If anyone has experience with a student accommodation from a post-Soviet country, you'll know it's not good. It's the only good thing about it is the price. I paid £40 per month, which is just unheard of in the world. But it does mean you have about 30 centimeters space between where you sleep and where the next person sleeps. It means 300 people sharing a kitchen, in my case. I just didn't cook in the student accommodation. And the heating is centralized, so you just cannot control it. And as Brits, we like to turn our radiators off, especially to save money. So it can be quite uncomfortable. And sometimes there are some strange people that even like Kazakhs would call strange by their own definitions. So it's good to avoid it if you can, but it is a backup option, and especially a cheap backup option. I'm speaking with experience from being a student affiliated to a university. So yeah, I don't know how many of you that will apply to, but I thought I'd say that as well. I also did get a question about joining university clubs if you are an international student or an exchange student. And it depends on universities to university, but I'm sure the vast majority will allow you to join their clubs and their societies because they really want, diverse people everywhere as much as they can. In some ways, the fact that we're not going to Russia is giving so many people in these countries an opportunity to meet people from the West, and they're extremely grateful for that. So even if officially you're not allowed to join a club, unofficially you'll be allowed to do so much because people would just be really interested in getting to know you, and likewise you should be really interested to getting to know these people as well. So those are all of our pre-questions. Hopefully we've answered all the other ones. We're very much open to other questions now. We've got quite a lot of them in the chat.
Yeah, I was just gonna say to Katrina, I will pass, Molly's going to speak about the host family things because I wasn't with the host family, but Molly was, and she can talk to you about. So that just to say to guys, the question is, could you talk a bit more about why you wouldn't recommend staying with the host family in Riga? That's the question. So Molly?
Yeah, go for it, Molly.
Okay, so for everyone that knows, I had quite an interesting host family experience. For the first month of my stay in Riga, I was with the host family. And then I moved to one of the language school so Leiden and Dance run student apartments. Honestly, I wouldn't really recommend either of them. I'll start with the student apartment because that's a bit simpler. It's just really, really expensive. And when they started getting a load of British students coming there, they moved the price up even more because they knew they could. Renting accommodation in Riga is not that expensive, especially compared to the UK. I think my friend was staying in a really lovely studio for about €300 a month. And yeah, the student apartments ridiculously overpriced. In terms of the host family, I only know a handful of people who had good experiences with safe host families, shall we say. They are very overpriced for what you're getting, and I had to move out of my host family because it became very unsafe very fast. A lot of boundaries weren't really respected. It wasn't a great experience. If anyone wants to hear about that, I'm happy to tell you at a later date. You guys can just message me. But overall, it's very overpriced. The standard isn't very high. And yeah, most people I know had either unsafe or just very negative experiences with host families in Riga.
I was not expecting that actually, so that's really good. So there you go. There's an example of someone who's been with a host family. I'm an example of student accommodation, and a bunch of us have used private accommodation as well. So if you've got any questions about accommodation, put them in the chat. If you've got any questions, you can either raise your hand and you can unmute yourself, or you can write them in the chat. We don't mind which one. But yeah, I'm sure some of you have lots of questions. And if you're scared, oh, maybe they've answered it, but I wasn't listening, ask it again, because we're more than happy to repeat ourselves. So yeah, this is your chance to talk to like 6 people that have done a year abroad. Snow in Estonia.
So snow in Estonia, it starts. Should I invest in food?
I think it means good boots.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely recommend getting snow boots. I think for us, snow started in early October. I think maybe end of September. It got very cold very quickly. And in a lot of places, they're not very good at putting salts on snow to melt it down. So it's very slippery. So definitely recommend snow boots. You will slip. It is almost unavoidable. You will slip. You should definitely get a hat because it gets really, really windy and it gets all over your eyes. So yes, I would definitely say invest in snow boots. But there are a lot of events as well during the winter. They have sometimes if it's cold enough, you can ice skate on the river, but you have to go a bit further out. So yeah.
Yeah. You've said everything that applies to Kazakhstan as well. I'm sure it'll apply to Kyrgyzstan. I've put this up so I can remind you how cold it gets. I never thought glasses could freeze by breathing, but they do. So to answer the question from the Kazakh perspective, they've got really good winter shoes. Like, I'm sure they're all knockoffs of Western products, but they've got things like Converses or Vans with fur inside them, and they're waterproof on the outside. And my boots that I bought in Kazakhstan, I think they were about 50, 60 pounds, but they had proper fur lining inside, and they were like, just, you need them, because by the time you go to Astana, you'll have 3 pairs of socks, fur-lined boots, and it's still not enough. So, yes. We've also got a few more questions now. So, Francesca, the name of the language school that you attended? Yes.
Yeah, just so that language school is through RILIS. If you want, I can send you the director manager of that school, so you can get in contact with him. His name's Robert Zensky, I think it was. And yeah, so that was RILIS, and accommodation was also arranged through RILIS, through the host families, so they have that option as well. There was another question about finding accommodation in Tallinn.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
areas? In the city centre, definitely. I lived 30 minutes outside of the city, and it was just really difficult to get anywhere. So I'm really sorry I have to leave, but if anyone has any questions about the language school in Tallinn in general, or travelling around Estonia, you can contact me on the UBASEECAS email or through my Instagram. I don't mind, whatever. And people who haven't emailed originally, could you please send an email to the UBASEECAS email so we can send you the recording afterwards?
Yes. One other thing with Francesca is that she's collated lots of information about Russian in Poland. So some of you had questions about that. Get directly in touch with Francesca and she'll be able to answer questions about Poland. She's become an expert over the last few days. So, yeah.
Yes.
We'll miss you, Francesca. Please do stay along. We've got an extra 10 minutes of this call. So if you still have questions, ask away. Maxon, could you talk about accommodation in Georgia?
Accommodation? Yeah. So what did I do? I did an Airbnb, which was more expensive than I would have liked it to be, but that is because my whole Georgia trip was very, very last minute because I wasn't expecting to go. I was expecting to be on another placement for the whole time. I did an Airbnb. Lots of other people did Airbnbs, and if you have time and do it in advance, then I'm sure you can find a much cheaper one. It was a very nice place. It was a great location, very central. But if you kind of have the time to organize something slightly, further out, maybe less convenient but cheaper, then it's definitely affordable. What a lot of my friends did, because I basically went by myself. I had friends there, but if you're going as a group from your university with people you know right off the bat, and you have time to plan it out, what you could do is get an Airbnb for the first weeks, the first month, then find an estate agent or something there. So lots of people I know lived in flats where they had tenancy agreements and it wasn't an Airbnb. Obviously, that's much cheaper. And then it's something, if you're planning on going for the whole year, it makes a lot more sense. No one was going to give me a lease for a month and a half. But in general, accommodation is not prohibitive. It's nothing like London prices in Georgia. And I personally don't like the metro very much, but that's because I've been spoiled by TfL. I was able to walk everywhere, but that was again because I was very central. So don't worry about being too far out because you'll be able to get there in 40 minutes to the school probably.
There's another question on Georgia, which I think you can also answer. Are there any vaccine requirements to enter?
Yes. So vaccinations, things you should get. Well, I'm trying to remember. I definitely got the hepatitis, because they were free on the NHS. And in fact, I need to go and get the second one, hepatitis A, because then it lasts for 20 years. So thank you for reminding me. Hepatitis is good. Like all the vaccines you need for life in the UK, get them anyway, but they're also useful in Georgia. Rabies. Rabies exists in Georgia. I didn't get a rabies vaccine because I didn't really have time and because it cost money. I should have done, because the way rabies works is that if you get bitten by a dog, you need to get vaccinated afterwards anyway, regardless of whether you've been vaccinated the first time. But the kind of vaccine you get is different. So the problem is that there's a certain kind of protein that's really rare and in high demand. So if you're vaccinated, you don't need it after you get bitten by a dog. The reason why rabies is an issue in Georgia is because there's lots and lots of stray dogs. You'll see them everywhere in Tbilisi. They are all tagged. There's a program of vaccination and neutering. If they've got a green tag on their ear, it means they're docile. If they've got a yellow tag, it means they're maybe a bit aggressive. If they got a red tag, then they have probably been shot by the government, because dogs that bite tend not to live very long in Georgia, unfortunately.
I will say that in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, you find stray dogs everywhere as well. It might be a trend across all these countries. I don't know about Estonia and Latvia, but...
No, there weren't any strays there.
Right, yeah. So we just need to swiftly move on to a few others. We've got 5 minutes left, and I want to get through as many as possible.
Get the rabies vaccine, because you won't get bitten unless you kind of go up to a dog and ask it to, but better safe than sorry.
Excellent. So, in short, get the rabies vaccine if you're comfortable with getting it. Okay, so what else do we have? We've got people in
Sorry,
Riga.
Yeah, in
Yes.
Riga, I was going to say for
Yeah.
the parts of the city that it's probably not best to live in. Molly, where was the place that you lived? With the host family?
So I lived in Moscow Vorstadt,
Yeah.
and it's not very safe. I'll
No.
say that. My host family also didn't lock the door at night, which didn't help. But Moscow Vorstadt, that's a no-no. You can walk there in the daytime. It's very nice, but it's not very safe.
We both lived at some point in student accommodations, which were quite close to each other, and that was a very safe area. I would say centrally it's very safe, and even like, to be honest, on the outskirts, there's a place called Plavniki, which is kind of a more like dormant side, but it's not really dangerous. It's just more like like houses and apartments and stuff. But I would say in general, apart from Moscow Vorstadt, it's very, very safe. So anyway, you go, you'll be fine.
There you go. And you have other places you would recommend that are on the plus side, so safer?
Just centrally, honestly.
As closer to the language schools you can get as possible, I'd say.
Yeah, it was so nice walking there, like every day. Like it would take 10 minutes. You had to be there at 9. I'd wake up at 8:30 just quickly. Oh, it was so good. Yeah.
Someone's asked about whether Dr. Martens are sufficient enough. I'd say for Estonia and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, no. I mean, Kate can also say whether they're good enough, but you'll probably find really cheap knockoff Dr. Martens that have fur lining inside them, like what I saw in Kazakhstan. So get those, keep your feet warm. You really need it. Do you have anything to add on to that, Kate?
I would say you could try, and if it doesn't work, you could buy, I'm not sure if you've seen those, there's like, you can just attach it. It's like a back strap, and there's like there's like pins which like grounds you to the snow, and you can attach them
for grip.
I'm not sure. Yeah, for grip.
You
could buy those if it doesn't work. And something I would like to add on about accommodation, we've lived in a really nice flat just across the uni, and they're not renting out until August. And if anyone is interested, you can message me. And it's a 2-minute walk from uni, and it's about a 10-minute or 7-minute walk to the old town, the city center. And it's a 2-people flat, and if anyone's interested, you can message me.
Alex has just put in the chat, come to Central Asia. He was in Kyrgyzstan for his year abroad, so yes. I really hope we've answered every question. If not, reaffirm your question using our social media. Or if the person you specifically want to talk to isn't available, come to me first, and then I'll get the social media from them if they're comfortable with it. If there's anything anyone else would like to say, you've probably got about a minute left to say it. So that can be an audience member who would like to ask a question and want to just say it, or a panelist. Okay, большое спасибо, очень интересно. There we go. Yeah, and thank all of you for attending. We are really happy that we've had such a good turnout. Just a quick note, if you would like to join our association on the committee, we have a few committee spaces that are available, and email us or message us for more. And it says it's about to end. So thank you for attending, and we'll be with more information in the future. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Спасибо.